What's up, everybody, and welcome back to TarHeelIllustrated.com, or, of course, if you are watching on our fast-growing YouTube channel, that's Tar Heel Illustrated. I'm THI staff writer Jacob Turner, and joining me, as he always does, for another episode of the UNC Basketball Show, it's our very own publisher, Andrew Jones. And AJ, we got another jam-packed show ahead. We're going to be talking about the Louisville and BC games just for a little bit before we move on to, I've got a question for you about Armando Bacot I want to ask you. I've already teased this with you. We haven't talked about this off camera.
I have no idea.
I want to kind of dive into that, have an organic conversation about him and kind of what the season he's having. And then we'll look ahead to NC State and Syracuse as well a little bit later on in the podcast. So let's talk about the wins over Louisville and BC, because we previewed these two games in our last UNC basketball show, and obviously now Tar Heels have won those games, improved to 13-6, 5-3 in ACC play. We're recording this on Wednesday evening, the day after the win over Boston College, so that's obviously fresh on our minds. But AJ, I think this team has grown this week in some different ways, and I think you'll agree with me on that topic. I think they've showed signs of growth looking at the Louisville game and looking at the BC game, which I'll dive into here in a second. But I want to ask you first, do you think the Tar Heels have grown this week and shown some positive things that are going to help them going into the remainder of the season?
Yeah, I think anytime you win, you grow, even if you don't play well. But I thought they played very well at Louisville. They did a lot of good things. They got a lot of production from the bench. And anytime this team, as they continue to find themselves and have all the parts settle in together, anytime they get production from the bench in victory, I think anytime you get production from the bench is good anyway, but especially in victory and on the road, absolutely. I thought Louisville gave them everything they had. Louisville does have some good parts. Every team in the league would take Ellis in a heartbeat, and they have some other solid players. But for Carolina, I just like the way they went into that game, like the way they approached it, and the Armando factor that after the injury last week, he gets a double-double in the first half at Louisville. The fact that he was just determined to play in that game against a winless team in the conference, determined to play Tuesday night against a BC team that's the least accomplished team in the conference in the last 10 years. I think that kind of stuff trickles down on everybody else. And I really believe the team played very hard at Louisville. I thought they played hard last night against BC. Didn't always play well. Some people were texting me about how lethargic the offense was. I think BC had something to do with that. I also think the Heels just weren't totally sharp, but that doesn't mean they weren't playing hard. So I think the mindset is there. Guys making plays late to help them win games. A lot of that comes from Armando. And we're going to get into Armando, as you said, in a few minutes. I have no idea what you're going to ask. But, yeah, I think that when his leadership and his lead by example trickles down into everybody else, I think that that's very big. So they won 2 games. They've won 8 out of 10 very quietly. They're not getting a whole lot of credit for that. And they're still very much in the finding themselves phase, and they're winning games. So I think that that's really, really big. They're positioning themselves very well for if and when the parts get close enough together that they just kind of take off, which I sense is coming at some point.
Yeah, I tweeted it last night, and we were talking about this off camera a little bit, and I kind of said, it just kind of feels like this team's like a somewhat consistent Caleb Love away from being like the best team in the country. And I mean that because I agree with what you're saying. I think you're starting to see these kind of parts come together. We know how good a lot of these players are, and we know how good some of these younger guys can be and have shown in glimpses this year. And I think Carolina at times has just not been able to get all those parts to click at the same time. And that's the challenge in college basketball. And you want that to click as you get later into the season like it did last year. But, you know, Armando Bacot being as good as he is, RJ Davis playing as good as he has. And not only that, but just making big time plays in some of these games when it matters. Even looking back to last night, I know Caleb Love struggled early on, but I mean, down the stretch, he was fantastic. I mean, he single-handedly kind of, when BC cut it to, what did they cut it to 3, I believe, or 2 at one point?
They cut it to 1, and then he had a quick 5-point spurt.
Yeah, and I made the play on the defensive end.
I took some flack for my comments about Caleb last night because I'm critical of people who are highly critical of him. You can criticize his shooting all you want, and I'm right there with you. He should shoot a lot better, but he's really struggling. I was watching him during warm-ups last night for a while, and the way he reacted to every miss, and he missed a lot during warm-ups, a lot more than usual. And Hubert even addressed last night that maybe there's something a little bit off with his shot. And Hubert would know. He's one of the all-time leading three-point shooters in NBA history.
Anybody would, yeah.
He can look at it and identify. And not every shot's the same, just like a baseball, and every batting stance is the same. But ultimately, certain mechanics of it must be really good in order for someone to be a consistent shooter. Maybe Caleb's struggling in that area right now, but the floor game has actually been there a lot more than people want to give him credit for. People equate a guy not shooting well to him not playing well or not even playing hard. And I vehemently disagree with that. I do think he goes through periods where stuff gets into his head because he's human. That does happen. He needs to learn to swat that away. He could take Armando as an example and just try take some of that Armando juice and instill it within and keep it there. And I think that those little 2 and 3 minute stretches where Caleb isn't, where he's just frustrated. I don't think it's not that he's not playing hard or not dialed in. He's just frustrated and it's getting the best of him. If he could eliminate that, I think some of these shooting stretches that we've seen, like late at UVA, late last night, I think we'll see more of that stuff earlier in games. And you and I were saying before we hit the record button, he's a flurry guy.
Mm-hmm.
He's not a guy who's going to get you a bucket 18-12, 15-19, 12-23, 8-46, 5-51.
Yes, no, it's not spread out like that.
He's a guy that gets you a bucket at 14-38, 13-49, 12-50, and then 12-17. That's the kind of player he is a lot, and that's great to have on your team when you have someone that heats up like that. So if the frustration factor, if he learns how to just squeeze that out and not let it interfere, you might see one of those stretches earlier in the game. So if he has one in the first half, one in the second half, and then a couple buckets and some free throws because he's good at drawing fouls and going to the line, sprinkled in between, suddenly you're talking about a 20-point game and a guy shooting 45%. Mm-hmm. And that's what they are away from being an outstanding team, even as the other parts still find their way around. I mean, having Pete back Tuesday night was really, really big because he now needs to assimilate again. And he was still trying to figure out how he best fit with this group. And I think Hubert needs to figure out when Pete fits on the floor as opposed to some other times. One of the benefits of the injuries and Hubert having to dig deep into the bench was we saw all the different parts that the bench has. The bench is like a skyline where each building is different. And you can identify that building, that building, that building, and that building because they're all different. And they're easy to spot because there are no two players alike that come off the bench. They can fill certain needs that you have. I think Pete is still a fill-a-need guy. We haven't seen him yet, other than maybe once or twice, have a game where it looks like he can handle all scenarios, all styles, all approaches. That is still being determined. And perhaps maybe there's some styles where he's maybe not as effective in, so you can go to the bench and use a Jalen Washington when he gets healthy again, use a Puff Johnson, maybe go small. We saw Hubert go four guard lineup in Louisville, and 20 seconds later he had Armando, Washington, and Puff on the floor. So they have that, and Hubert's still learning to use that, and I think the confidence that he's getting from the bench, even last night, they weren't super productive, but they play with confidence. Puff's confidence is fine now. That was an issue before. It's fine now. You talk about the 4-game losing streak, and I know I'm kind of going along here, but you and I hit on this as we were chatting before we hit the record.
Should have hit record before we, 20 minutes ago.
Puff was struggling during the 4-game losing streak. RJ wasn't hitting anything during the 4-game losing streak. Caleb was kind of doing what Caleb's done all year. And Armando was a different player. He didn't have the same juice. And Hubert has said multiple times, including last night, Armando sitting at the Virginia Tech game was really big for him. It allowed him to sort of reset things. And he did. And he's been phenomenal. He's been National Player of the Year good ever since then. Mm-hmm. So and they're using bench now in a way they weren't using it then. They're a totally different team. DeMarco Dunn's far more confident. Puff is far more confident. The fact that they have Jalen Washington now and they didn't back then. RJ's playing so much better. Armando's playing so much better. Pete's still figuring things out. And I think they're a better defensive team now than they were then. The numbers show they're a much better rebounding team than they were then. So, and also, they're 0-2 in the state of Virginia, basically without Armando. And at UVA, they also didn't have Pete. So I don't think it's as nasty as a lot of people think. They've looked really bad at times, and they've looked as if the mojo wasn't totally there at times. But most of that was early. I think people's narrative is based on what they saw around Thanksgiving. And I think it's a different club right now, and I do think it's trending that way in every manner. The numbers show it. My eyes tell me that, and they've won 8 out of 10, with one of the losses being a game at Pitt that they had a 9-point lead and just squirted it away. And the other one was without Armando and Pete at Virginia, a game they led with 6 minutes left or whatever. So I think they're in better shape than a lot of other people believe.
Yeah, no, I definitely do too. I want to talk about Armando. I know you've hit on him. Before we do that, I want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor on this podcast, and that's rogueshop.com. Check them out. The Rogue Shop. They're awesome. Specialize in top shelf family grown hemp products, CBD, Delta 8, Delta 9, tinctures, oils, gummies, candies, creams, whatever way you like to use their products, they've got it for you. And all of the stuff is just amazingly high quality as well. So check them out. Make sure you use the promo code TARHEELS10 to save on your next order as well. And just can't speak highly enough about just the quality of their products, the care they put into what they make. And I mean, I was so impressed when I first got the little goodie box they sent us, a few of us at THI, when we first had them as a sponsor, man. And just the attention to detail, even in the packaging, AJ, was top notch.
Good.
It is, man. I mean,
look at this. Pain free. It was really hurting me last week, and a little rub on there several days in a row, and AJ's feeling like a spry younger AJ.
I'm telling you, man, the CBD cream.
Back in my basketball playing days.
I'm telling you, man, the CBD cream is like I've told you, my parents have used it. My fiance Carly has used it. I've used it. I mean, they've reordered it too. Don't get it twisted. It wasn't like they just got like one bottle and didn't order it anymore. It's the real deal. So check them out. It really is, man. Their stuff's fantastic. So check them out again, rogueshop.com. Make sure you use that promo code TARHEELS10 to save. Links in the description below. AJ, let's talk about Armando. And I mentioned earlier, I wanted to kind of ask you a question about him, because I can't help but look back with Armando when I see him play as well as he has this year, and even going back to last year at times. He's just been fantastic. I was thinking about it during the game last night, and I had someone text me and just be like, Armando is absolutely beasting right now. And I was like, it kind of struck me like, man, like I was like, man, he's really good. Like, he's a phenomenal college basketball player. The things he's able to do, and not only that, but like the ways in which he does it, especially this year in some big games this year too. I'll go back to the Michigan game where he's absolutely dominated Hunter Dickinson down low. I've never seen anything quite like it. Even last night, it almost looks effortless at times at what he's able to do out there and just completely dominate. Obviously tied the school record for 60 double-doubles. This is the question I have for you as well, because he's going to end up setting multiple records at North Carolina that haven't been broken in a long time. He just is. He's on course to do that if he stays healthy. When you look back to his freshman and sophomore years in particular his freshman year, because I was with you during those seasons. I obviously didn't cover all the away games, but every home game I was there with you. I covered a lot of local away games and regional away games as well. So I was there on the road for you, and we got to see that team, in particular Armando Bacot as a freshman, go through the struggles that they faced. When you go back to pre-COVID, ACC tournament in Greensboro, voices in his head interview kind of thing, quotes like that, and you look at where he's at now, I'm not just talking about on the court. I want to talk about off the court too, because he's grown in both those ways so much. And we've talked about similar things like this before about Armando Bacot, but you've covered college basketball, sports in general, for a long time. In particular at college, in particular at North Carolina, have you ever seen a kid quite like Armando, kind of where he was at his freshman year? And like I said, even tying his sophomore year in there with some of the things he talked about, just the struggles he had, to where he is now in his fourth year. Have you ever seen a player like that? Yeah. Is his story pretty unique in that respect?
It is unique. One of the greatest shooters in ACC, I'm not going to mention him because people get kicked when I talk about certain schools that I've covered, but one of the greatest shooters in ACC history was a kid who had a lot of issues his freshman, sophomore year. And then he flipped the switch, and then he became a much better all-around player. Wasn't just a shooter. Ended up playing a long time in the NBA, making a lot of money. Now he does a very popular podcast. So I'm not going to mention any names.
I know we've talked about that off camera.
But one of the things that impressed me so much about him was personal growth. Armando, personal growth, but he didn't have to grow out of the issues the other guy did, for example, and some of the others. Armando had a lot of things in order when he got to Carolina, but he was affected by performance. I think he thought things were going to be easier. He was buddies with Cole. Cole was a one-and-done guy, and say what you will about how Cole played at North Carolina, but there were obviously times when you just saw an absolute NBA player out there, and that wasn't always the case with Armando, and I think he thought that would have been the case a little bit sooner. So he was forced to sort of reassess his time plan. And I thought it was really, really big that when he was accepted into the Keenan Flagler Business School, it showed that there was a longer-term vision there, which we didn't really get to know his freshman year because we always didn't talk to him because he wasn't, he had that stretch where he wasn't very productive. They were losing a ton of games. When Cole was there, we go talk to Cole. For Leaky was my go-to guy that year for interviews about just kind of getting a vibe of the team. Andrew Platek was pretty good with that, but they had a lot of mishmash parts. Justin Pierce, Christian Keeling, and
just didn't work.
Things, Garrison. Garrison actually was pretty solid for a while during a stretch that year, and which is why he was preseason ACC Player of the Year the next year. But Garrison wasn't great after losses. He didn't really express much about the team after that. Armando is a guy that has grown into being an unbelievable spokesman for the team and an honest one. And I think it's a refreshingly honest because when they suck, he'll tell you they sucked. And he'll tell you why. And it's funny because Hubert said Tuesday night, Armando's not a vocal leader, but he does talk. He's not a rah-rah kind of guy. He's not going to get in everybody's face in the locker room and get them, ready to run out of the tunnel like a football team and go, run through walls for a coach. Yeah. There's a different kind of leadership that he has there, but he does talk. I told you Saturday at Louisville, there were multiple times in the first half he would say something to a player because they did something wrong. They would nod and go on because you nod to Armando. Imagine if you were in that little world, which is the Carolina locker room. There's nobody in that room that it comes close to being as accomplished as Armando. And quite frankly, there's nobody in that room that expresses themselves quite like Armando and is totally open to expressing themselves to somebody else the way Armando does. So they listen. Everybody listens to him in that room. And so I think that he carries so much clout with this team. I don't know if I've seen a guy go from the voices in his head and the media thinking maybe he's just a big kid as a freshman, to still being a big kid now, but being the ultimate adult in the room at the same time. That's a good way to put it. Which is fascinating about him. And I think it's what's so enjoyable. And I'll tell you right now, everybody in the media loves talking to him, not because he gives us one-liners, which he does, but he's just like a normal dude. He knows who he is. He knows what the numbers are. He understands that he is the face of this massive thing called North Carolina basketball. He loves that. But I don't think it goes to his head. He doesn't big time media. If somebody asks a question that he disagrees with, he'll say he disagrees with it, but he does so respectfully. There have been players I've covered at Carolina and other places in the past that would almost view every question in a negative light, and they would try to defend against any question. Like, hey, you had 35 rebounds today. What was working for you? They kind of go that direction. Armando doesn't. Armando will have a dialogue with you. Yeah. And that's really, really important because as a guy who covers the team, it helps me understand the best player on the team, but also the team in general. So I always walk away from Armando interviews feeling like I know the team better and I understand their disposition better because he'll tell you. There's no guessing with Armando. It is what it is. He tells you, he goes out there on the court and he performs. And as far as him as a basketball player, Jacob, his improvement using the left hand this year. Oh, yeah. All things left hand and that spin move. And because he's confident with the left hand, he can spin both ways. Last year, teams would double him a certain way because he didn't always spin well left. The spin was coming right or he was going to shoot a jump hook. Now he's got that spin move. Goes left, can pound it on the floor a couple of times and go up with his left hand, and it's impossible to defend. So he's a really, really good basketball player. He's not just a rebounder. He's 26 in scoring. He passed Hubert last night. And I did the math. I wrote a column about him last night about how he needs a nickname. And we can talk about that in a second if you want.
Yeah, we got to brainstorm.
I was extrapolating the ahead with the scoring numbers. He's averaging 17.6 points right now. And that's also including the fact that he basically didn't play at Virginia, but it counts as a game. So if he averages 17.6 the rest of the season, let's say they play 2 games in Greensboro in the ACC tournament, and they play 3 games in the NCAA, that's 17 more games. That'll make 300 points, okay? That would put him ninth all-time in scoring in between Antoine Jamison and Brad Daugherty. He would be the all-time leading rebounder, all-time leader in double-doubles, all-time leader in double-figure rebound games. And then remember what he did last year in the NCAA tournament. He's the only guy to get a double-double in all 6 games in the NCAA tournament, and on and on and on. You're talking about somebody who future Tar Heels are going to be compared to. Future Tar Heels are going to chase him in the record books, if they're fortunate enough to have really, really good players to stick around like Armando has. So you're talking someone who is going to go down in Tar Heel lore. And he's done it at a really interesting time. He's done it with the second losingest team in school history. He's done it with the transition from Roy to Hubert. And, oh, by the way, they had the miracle run to the national title game. There's a whole lot of storylines around the era of Carolina basketball he's been involved in. But one of the constants has been Armando getting better and better and better and better. And I still think he can get better between now and April. And I think that he will. And we talk about Caleb going off and how that's important to this team. You know, Armando's bank, that's money in the bank every time they take the floor. And he's the last 2 games, he had double-doubles in the first half coming off that terrible injury. And he's gone, 28-16 last night. He's, 16-14 or whatever it was in Louisville. If he's that the rest of the way, he's National Player of the Year, and and Caleb comes on, they're a national title contender, no doubt.
Oh, 100%. And I'm glad you listed the records out because I don't know, man. I just feel like people aren't really talking about it. I feel like people don't really understand that. What is he, 19 rebounds away from breaking Tyler Hansbrough's record? I mean,
17,
something like he's going to pass that. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And you look at all the other ones you listed that he's, either going to be very high in or just number one in. I mean, like I just feel like people don't really maybe understand because they're living in it right now, just how good of a basketball player Armando Bacot is in North Carolina history.
Well, they haven't won a ton. They haven't won a ton. I mean, he was on the 14-19 team.
That's a good point.
On Roy's last team, the only Roy team that ever lost in the first round of the NCAA tournament. They got blown out. Last year's team had 9 losses when they went in the NCAA tournament, and they had some ugly, ugly stretches. This year's team had the 4-game losing streak, and they're the first preseason number one team. They've fallen out of the polls quicker than anybody else. It was 8 days. They went from number one to not ranked. He's been on all those teams, so that affects things. And maybe that's one of the reasons he's also been so productive, because he's always on the floor. But there's more to it than that. He's a phenomenal player. I think, there are going to be some comparisons to Hansbrough, because when you think about his motor, his desire to win, his determination to rip someone's head off, basically, is very similar to Tyler Hansbrough.
In ways, yeah.
Tyler was a better player in every way. There's no doubt about it. And Armando knows that. In fact, I told him after Louisville, I said, some people are about the toughness about him. Oh, he's not going to play. But then he's out there in the court and he goes 16-14 against Louisville. I said, someone compared you to Tyler Hansbrough's toughness. He goes, no, I'm not there. I'm not that. He understands that.
Yeah,
he's
he
a
gets
smart
it.
guy. But when Tyler was playing, everybody knew you were watching a North Carolina legend right in front of you. It wasn't guesswork. You knew it right away. He had 40 his freshman year against Georgia Tech.
I was there, by the way. One of the few games I went to back then.
Yeah, he goes into Cameron and wins and hits that 3 in Cameron and all that kind of stuff. And he was legendary right out of the gate. Armando hasn't been that. He's been sort of an ascent here. And I don't think anyone's ever going to compare him to that. He probably won't be on the front line of the rafters unless he wins National Player of the Year. Then he gets his jersey retired and he's on the front row. But I think a big part of it is the team hasn't been great during his time. And it's interesting. The other comparison to Tyler is that two guys that are unbelievably productive that aren't the most fluid guys. Tyler was a bull in a china shop. There's a lot of bull in a china shop in Armando as well. Mm-hmm. But they both ran the floor well. They were both great offensive rebounders. They were both determined dudes. They both got in the heads of opponents. Tyler was just a little bit better in all areas than Armando, although Armando's going to end up with more rebounds. So maybe he wasn't in that area.
Yeah, no, you're right, man. It's just you are correct about the winning part. That obviously played such a huge factor because, some programs, and especially with the struggles he had early on in his career. But I've talked about this with a lot of people. Like some programs, like 10 losses is like, that's a good season. But like in North Carolina, 10 losses is a lot. That's bad. You know what I mean? Like there's a different standard here in terms of
well,
that.
His story hasn't been written yet. I was thinking,
no, he's got still a lot of time left. Yeah.
Sean May's story has been written. It's done. It's over. Okay. He did what he did. We don't know what the final couple of chapters in Armando's story are going to be, and then how that affects the whole story in the end. Mm-hmm. Let's say they do go on a roll. Let's say they win a national title. Well, then Sean won one, Tyler won one, et cetera. So you have that to add to it. So I think that we don't really know exactly what his legacy will be just yet, because story's still in the midst of it, and he has a lot of control over what ultimately is that story.
Yeah, it's going to be fun to watch. I mean, it is going to be fun to watch because we've talked about it a lot on here, but just to repeat it again, it does feel like this Carolina team gets close to being really, really good again. AJ, I want to look ahead real quick. Let's talk about Syracuse or NC State coming up. Next two games for the Tar Heels, obviously this Saturday against the Wolfpack, 5 p.m. In the Smith Center, and then the Tar Heels go to Syracuse next Tuesday. I believe that's a 9 p.m. tip-off. You gotta load those 9 p.m. tip-offs, man. Absolutely fantastic.
Especially on the road.
Yeah, especially on the road, especially if someone's got to travel up there. Looking at State, 15-4, 5-3 in the ACC, won 7 of the last 8 games. I mean, just knocked Miami off not too long ago as well. I mean, this is a State team, especially when you look at how much they struggled. I mean, they're just flat out bad last year. I'll just come out and say it. They were horrible last year. And you look at where they are now, and even if you look at the roster, it's not like it's just full of McDonald's All-Americans or something like that. This is a team that is made up of some really some nice parts. Quavian Smith obviously being the guy for them, but what they've been able to do this year, particularly in ACC play so far, I know they're still 5-3, same record as the Tar Heels, but they're having a really good season for their standard. And we were talking about this off camera. We'll start with the State game, obviously, and then we'll talk a little bit about Syracuse at the end, but this hasn't been a rivalry in the last couple of years. I mean, obviously it is on the court, especially when it's a lot more in Raleigh. If you've ever been to Raleigh in a game in the Smith Center against the Wolfpack, you'll understand that. It's just a little bit more height in there, for lack of a better word. And AJ's laughing because he agrees with me. He knows I'm not lying.
And it's a rivalry just when you look at the colors of the uniforms. So that's the people in red despise Carolina blue, no matter what it is. They would scream at Carolina tennis players if they showed up. So
it's so true. It's so true, man. But looking at the game, like by
the way, and I love that.
It's fantastic. It's fantastic. This is the beautiful thing about sports in a lot of ways. You got to love it. You're looking at the last few years in just both games. I mean, Carolina's just absolutely blown them out on multiple occasions. I mean, it hasn't really been a game in recent years. And even going back to when Roy came in, I mean, Roy did not lose to NC State. I mean, it's just something he didn't do. I mean, he had a few in there, but overall, his record against NC State was absolutely phenomenal. So when you look at a team like this that's coming into Chapel, and you look at a Carolina team who's, like I said, kind of finding its stride right now, I think this could be a really interesting matchup. And I think NC State does have the ability to, this team in particular, the way they're playing right now, to come into the Smith Center and beat this Carolina team, especially if, a guy like Caleb Love has a really quiet night again. So what do you make about this game? Because I think it's a really interesting matchup, and I could still see a scenario where Carolina, not blows NC State out, but wins pretty comfortably. But it's not as straightforward as it maybe has been in the past few years, when it just never felt like it was a game in a lot of the matchups we've seen.
Yeah, I think State could go in there and win by 15 as well. Mm-hmm. State does a lot of things well. Of all the teams in the ACC that are overperforming or performing above expectation, nobody's doing so more than State. And I include Clemson in there because, like, for me, I think I had Clemson 5th or 6th. I had State 13th or 14th, maybe. Mm-hmm. So I really missed badly on State. And you got to credit Kevin Keats. I think one of the storylines in the league this year is a sidebar. 3 guys that are saving their jobs. Jeff Capel, Brad Brownell, and Kevin Keats saving their jobs this season. which is very interesting. And what I see from NC State and talking to people who cover them as well, because I haven't seen State as much as I would like to. I tape a lot of that. I have like 9 games on tape. I still
never have time to watch it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But I've seen State, obviously. But I like to watch every game if I can, especially the teams around here, the programs I've covered for a long time. And until I took this job, I covered NC State as much as I covered anybody. And one thing I like about this team is that they do so much well. They score well. They score from the perimeter well. They can drive the ball on you well. They are defensively very good on the perimeter. They defend well in the paint. They turn defense into offense really, really well. Their Ken Palm numbers are really, really strong. So this isn't a club that's fattened up on bad teams. They've had some really solid wins. They almost beat Kansas, and that was sort of the first time where you say, huh. Because they had a lead, and Kansas made pushes at them, and State kept fighting back. They kept swinging back, and I thought that was really impressive. It showed that this club had some spunk in them, and we've seen that carry on throughout the year. They have a fantastic player, DeQuavian Smith. They've got some really good players in Jarkel Joyner and Casey Morcell, who's a fantastic defensive player who trained for a couple of years under Tony Bennett at UVA. They have a couple of guys out right now, and so I don't know what the status for this weekend is, a couple of former starters, but they've been really good without those guys. And this DJ Burns kid, I don't know how much Carolina fans watch other teams, but if you've watched State and Burns is in the game, you can't help but notice him. He's huge.
Yeah, he is.
And he that matchup with Armando is going to be really interesting because if he scores on Armando, he has no problem getting guys on his hip. He's got a good left hand and he's kind of smooth around the basket. He's got really good fingertips, it looks like. So he can score when he gets a guy on his hip. And because he's so big, he creates tremendous separation. So does that frustrate Armando? How does that play out? I think that's going to be really interesting. And obviously, Caleb has to hit shots at some point. He doesn't need me or anybody else defending his floor game. One of his primary job is got to hit shots. Hit shots and defend. I think the defending has been a lot better, but he's got to hit shots. And Roy Williams used to say all the time, you got to be tough to make shots. Hitting shots is a toughness. So the frustration I talked about earlier has to go away, especially in a game like this, because State will goad him into taking a lot of quick shots. He's going to have to hit some of them.
Yeah.
He did last year. The Carolina was scorching from the perimeter last year at home against State. And it kind of covered up how they played otherwise, because sometimes we just hit a bunch of threes.
Yeah, I remember talking about that.
Everything that happens within the three-point circle it just overshadowed because a three-pointer just kind of nullifies a lot of that stuff. So we don't know really if they played that well. They just hit a ton of threes. They need to hit at least some and hit some early and maybe force Keats to make some adjustments. If Keats doesn't have to make any adjustments, State's going to win this game. That's the way I look at it, because that means everything will be working for them. But Carolina has handled the press a little bit better this year. So there's going to be a lot of pressure. The guards are going to have to make good decisions. And again, it's going to come down to Caleb. Because of the way State plays defense, Caleb has to play under control. He's got to be very aware of his teammates, and he's got to make really good decisions on when to drive, when to shoot, when to give it up, when to kick it out, all that kind of stuff. So I think this is going to be a fun game. It could be a very high-scoring game. And I think it's good to see State playing well, because I'm a firm believer that when the triangle, all 3 teams in a triangle matter a lot, then ACC basketball is a lot better.
Yeah.
So I think it's cool. I think it's good to see, because they've had some bad basketball over there for a while, and including when I was covering them a lot too. And it's good to see them with excitement.
Yeah, no doubt.
And it's good to see rivalry games which the visiting team has a legitimate chance of winning, because it just ramps it up that much more. Carolina fans better understand that, and the Tar Heels may need them as a 6th man on Saturday.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a good game, and we'll see what happens. I think it's a game that Carolina's probably going to go when they're expecting to win, but they've got to play well to do it. It's not a game they can just show up.
I think Terquavian's comments the other day will get their attention, and Armando will figure out a way to make it sound like Terquavian, was calling them out in a way he really wasn't. I totally get what he was saying.
Yeah, no doubt.
but it's like that because State hasn't won. I mean, State hasn't been very good for the last 30 years. That's reality. The history up to that point was fantastic, but it hasn't been great for the last 30 years. And so I'm sure he understands that's one of the reasons why the blue teams are the blue teams. But this club can win, but I also think his comments should resonate in the Carolina locker room, and they could figure out a way to make it sound like he was like Kirby Smart did with his team this year. Make them believe they were completely dissed by everybody, and they go out and rip heads
beat
off.
you by 60. Yeah,
yeah, that'll be Armando's job this week to kind of get them to think that Terquavian really called them out and dogged them.
Yeah,
and he'll try.
It'll be you'll know what Carolina fans will know what I'm talking about. It'll be a very fascinating game to watch if Caleb and Armando play very well, because you're talking about guys who don't mind trash talking a little bit, for lack of a better word. So I think that'll be fascinating to see if they do have a good game, because there's no way they heard it. You know what I mean? If
that happens, the refs are going to have to separate some guys a few times.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. I was like, this.
I'm all for. I like when guys have an edge on the basketball court. I love that. So. Yeah. As long as nothing dirty happens, just some shoving and some name calling and chirping, I'm good with that.
That's what you want, Robert. I was just thinking that, like, there could be what we're talking about right now. There's a chance for this game to be kind of chippy, and I think that's better for the rivalry, and I think that's what a lot of people want to see. So, and if it's chippy, that usually means and if it's chippy, it usually means it's a tight game as well. I know it can happen in blowouts too, but usually if it's a super physical kind of chippy game and a tight one, it's fascinating to watch. So, real quickly too on Syracuse, I know we're still about less than 6 days from there right now. So I got to get through State before you look at Syracuse from a Carolina perspective. But 12-7, 5-3, another, two teams that Carolina are playing at least right now in the next couple of games are both sitting with the same record as the Tar Heels at 5-3 in the ACC. So I think more importantly, Carolina wants to win these games and needs to win these games in a lot of ways to keep kind of showing these signs of progress that we've been seeing. But it's also potential big wins for just where the ACC is at right now, when you're playing teams that are in the same kind of position you were at right now. So if you want to climb up that ladder, these potentially would be some big wins to help you do that. So what are your thoughts on the challenge that Syracuse brings, particularly with it being in New York? I know it's a team Carolina's handled pretty well in recent years playing against that zone, but it's still a challenge, and I still think it's going to be a tough game for the Tar Heels.
Well, these would be good wins, so they need good wins. State's a tournament team, and I think Syracuse is trending in that direction. I watched the game the other night against Miami, and I really like the way Syracuse plays. This is a bit different than the teams that Boeheim has had in recent years because it's bouncier, much bouncier. And also they kind of have more of the right kind of parts to handle that zone, to run that zone that he wants. So they're a much better team now than they were in November. They had some terrible performances in November.
Yeah, they did.
They're a much better team. They have a lot of young kids. Judah Mintz at the point, he's a freshman. I love Boeheim putting him on the ball and taking Gerard off the ball. Because Gerard, man, he's got like an old man's game, but he's also got a very new game too. He can score. He's the kind of guy that I think can cause a lot of problems for Carolina with the matchup because of his ability to back in somebody and score immediately. And he could just catch and shoot threes, and the defense has to be uber aware of where he is at all times. Plus, you got to be aware of Mintz on the ball. When Gerard used to be on the ball, they had other shooters out there and stuff, but I just thought that for this Carolina team with their makeup, they didn't have a ton of difficulty at times defending what Syracuse had. I know once his face went off in Dean Dome last year, but Buddy Boeheim didn't, because Leakey was on him. I think the matchup's now a little bit different for Carolina. And up there, that'll be a really big game for Syracuse. That'll be one of those games where they got to get if they're going to get to the tournament. Yeah. And I think they're a team that they get the tournament, they can win a game or two. So this is a big game for Carolina. It's no longer the Carrier Dome. I have no idea what the name of it is because I've looked at it a few times and I'm like, my brain cannot handle that place being called something other than the Carrier Dome. Which is a problem, and I'm going to probably call it Carrier Dome for the rest of my life. But
I've got it right here. Do you want to know the name?
What is? Yeah, tell me what it is.
The JMA Wireless Dome.
Yeah, whatever.
That's not.
I hope the wireless is good. Okay, all right. Now I'm putting it on them. That means the wireless better be much better on press row because the wireless has sucked on press row there before. All right.
I think it sucks every time you go, if I remember correctly.
That's one of the great media communication schools, journalism schools in the country. And the wireless has sucked. And the press room is in the visiting football locker room.
No excuses now. There's no excuses. I was just looking at who JMA Wireless is.
Tables
it's a wireless
work areas that have chipped wood and bad chairs and all kinds of stuff. And we always do the post-game presser in a different spot every time there. So but it was a Carrier Dome. It didn't have air conditioning. Carrier is an air conditioning. So now they're named after a wireless company. Maybe wireless will be even worse.
They might not even have Wi-Fi anymore at this rate. It might just be on it might just be out of luck.
Well,
writing on a notepad.
I'll tell you what, though, it's a wonderful place to see a game when it's full and the fans are optimistic. It's a fantastic environment. It's a really cool setup. And the Tar Heels have had a lot of success there. So I think they should win both these games. But if they lose one or both, I wouldn't be surprised because they're playing good teams. But for the Tar Heels to continue the parts coming together, they have to win these games. They would move to 15-6 and then have a week off and get a chance to get a little bit healthy and recalibrate a little bit. And, then have the final 5 weeks of the season before they head into the postseason. So these are the times where you gotta get these W's, and this team needs wins because they still have the potential of playing in Greensboro in the opening weekend of the NCAA tournament. But I don't really have that on my radar so much right now when I talk about this team, except just mentioning it because they haven't won enough. But they have to just win, string together wins. Keep winning, keep getting better, get contributions from the bench, figure out how Pete fits in with stuff. And Caleb's got to at least get to like 42% consistently. And if that happens, and I say 42% because he's been at 30 for the last 6 games. So if he's at 42%, that's a significant upgrade. And I think this is a different team, but they've got a long way to go and a lot of games to navigate through.
Yeah, they just need to win. I feel like it's funny because I feel like that we were saying the same thing a year ago with last year's team around this time of year.
But they need to play well and win too. They need to do good things. And when last year's team just need to know what it felt like going to the locker room after win.
Yeah, just get a run together.
This year's team needs to win, but they need to show improvements in winning as well. Because I think the ceiling in the end is still higher for this team than it was a year ago. They were the number 1 team in the preseason for a reason. They were a lot of people's pick to win a national title for a reason. Like the team's still there, and in a way, I think we see that the bench is more than what we knew it would be 6-7 weeks ago. So the guys have to get it going. Caleb has to get it going. He's got to become consistent like RJ has. And Pete has to they have to figure out exactly who Pete is with this team on both ends of the court and how much, when you use them and when maybe you go to the bench and don't use them. Those things are still to be determined. And when those get determined, then I think this team can climb into that spot of significant national title contender. They're not that team right now, but it's there in front of them, but it's up to them to get to that point.
Yeah, it is. Real quick, we're going to wrap it up after this. I actually meant to ask you this earlier, but you just mentioned the bench again, so I want to ask you this real quick. Looking at the bench, do you think there's a chance in a month or 2 months from now, depending on how things shake out for the Tar Heels, we'll kind of look back to that Nance injury and look back to the Armando missing, with the game of UVA and some other injury issues that the Tar Heels have had this year that has caused, important guys to miss games and say, that was kind of the best thing that ever happened to this team because of the production they were able to get and because of it forced a guy like Hubert Davis to say, all right, you guys got to go play in big time environments. And like you said, we've seen these bench players provide and grow over the last couple of weeks because of it. So do you think there's a chance we're having a conversation like that in a couple months?
Yeah, I'm a believer in teams that ultimately challenge for titles and make runs, or teams that continue to grow and change. And clubs that have had no adversity are the same now that they were on November 8th when they started playing. They've been doing that for almost 2.5 months. A lot of them have peaked.
It's a good
point. A lot of them are peaking. I think when you're ever changing, you don't want to ever change right through February. You want to hit a point in late January, early February where you're set. This is who you are. Now let's take off. Let's gain traction and get into the postseason. So that's why they really need to ramp things up right now, because they're reaching that point. But yeah, I think absolutely. We never would have seen Jalen Washington for 46 minutes last week without that stuff happening. And now Jalen doesn't play last night, and everyone's like, where's Jalen?
Yeah.
A week and a half ago, no one would have said that. He wouldn't have been noticed if he wasn't in warm-up. So, yeah, absolutely. There were 4 straight games before Tuesday night in which someone from the bench either scored a career high or a season high.
Mm-hmm.
That happened because there was some attrition, there was some adversity, some injuries, and they're going to be better for it moving forward. There's no doubt in my mind about it. I still think that the bench has a lot of different parts that Hubert can continue to use situationally and circumstantially moving forward, as he has. People don't understand his substitution philosophy because they're not used to it. They're used to this guy going in for this amount of minutes in the first half, that guy playing this amount of minutes for the first half, and so on. When Hubert substitutes simply based on need, it's very NBA-ish, and it makes a lot of sense. I think it's interesting. It's more interesting for me as a guy who covers the team. And I think it actually is going to make them better in that the guys that are getting significant minutes on the court, they're getting a lot of minutes in stretches, and they've stepped up and produced. So what I've seen from the bench guys is their confidence for each of those guys has grown so much. We're still looking at Tyler Nickel. I think Tyler's confidence was growing for a while. He hasn't played much lately. I don't know if Tyler's going to be called on in March. He may not be. I know that Seth Trimble will. He was out getting a lot of extra work last night after the game, getting in a lot of extra shots, had someone out there working with him. So he's working on shooting because he knows he needs to shoot the ball better. But there are a lot of things they know they can trust with Seth. I think they've reached a point where there's full trust with Puff. I think that they have reached a point now where there's full trust with DeMarcus. So that's 3. Then you've got Jamin, which could be a 4th guy. So those 4 right there are going to play in March. And I think they're very confident and comfortable with what they can deliver. Then you've got a few other parts that can come in if necessary as well that are different and can help in pinches. So, Justin McCoy had, 6 rebounds at UVA. He's not going to score a lot of points because he's just not springy, quick, and bouncy, but he can do some things for you. So if you have him as your 10th, 11th, 12th man or whatever it is, a lot of clubs would take that. A lot of clubs would take 10th, 11th, and 12th men to be a combination of Tyler Nickel, Dontrez Styles, and Justin McCoy, and that's what they have. So I do think that they're well situated, but some stuff has to come together still in order for this team to be anything close to what we thought it would be, because it's not yet.
Still the team to beat in the ACC, in your opinion?
I think so. I still think so. The schedule is going to help them as far as iron sharpens iron. All their home games they have left are against teams that I think will make the NCAA tournament. And then the road games, they've got the 3 in-state schools. So those are all tough. They've got to go to Syracuse. That'll be tough. But they also have Notre Dame, which, they're the biggest disappointment in the league this year, I think. And then Florida State, they have a lot of circumstances that have led to their situation, but they're 4-4 in the league. They're playing better now.
Yeah, they've improved
because they've gotten some guys back. But Carolina should still be able to go down there if their mind's right and win in Tallahassee. So they've got a lot of competitive games left against good teams. So they're gonna, if they win, they're gonna get better as a result of winning, and shows that they'll have to come through and do a lot of stuff to win those games. The bench guy here, the Nance going off there, Leaky having a 15-point game there. All that stuff is there, and they're going to need all of that to come out here in the next 6 weeks or so to win the ACC regular season title, which I still think ultimately they're the team to beat to do that. And it helps them, by the way, that their only game against Miami is at home and their only game against Clemson is at home.
Yeah, that's a great point. That is our two big scenarios for them right now, because those would have been tough road games. I mean, Miami always seems to be tough for the Tar Heels, and obviously the way Clemson's playing this year will be a tough environment to go into. Yeah. So it's going to be fun. I always say it kind of in these shows. We're know a heck of a lot more about the Tar Heels in a month from now, and even when we do our next show a week from now.
I think in a week. Yeah, these 2 games are going to learn a lot.
Big opportunities. Yeah, I think if Carolina can come out of that 2-0. We'll be having a similar conversation next week about growing again and kind of what we've seen in that respect after 2 big victories. So we'll talk about it, after these games. Make sure you guys keep it locked to TarHeelIllustrated.com for all your coverage, not only leading up to these games, but during it and after it as well. And keep it locked to our YouTube channel, Tar Heel Illustrated. Oh, yeah, Tar Heel Illustrated as well. One more thing, AJ, let's do this. Let's see if we can get some likes on this video. If you do think Carolina's going to go 2-0 in the next 2 games, so win over State, win over Syracuse, go ahead and hit that thumbs up button below. Let's see how many we can rack up on this one. I've been Jacob Turner. He's been Andrew Jones. Make sure you check him out again. We want to thank our sponsor once again, the Rogue Shop. Check them out, rogueshop.com. Make sure you use that promo code TARHEELS10 to save on your order. Links are in the description below for all that. Big shout out to them for continuing to sponsor us. AJ, appreciate you joining me, man. If you guys like, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell as well so you know every single time we upload. And if you guys notice, we do upload a ton this time of year. Thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks.